Earlier this year, there was a highly controversial study that released as a follow-up to a study before it. Both studies ultimately showed that lifelong endurance exercise was linked to increased plaque in the arteries, a major problem in cardiovascular disease. Now, there was a lot of nuances to that result, so I'll repeat up front that it was not discussing people who are just going out for a jogging a few times a week. We're talking about lifelong heavy endurance training. Still, there's much more to be said on the topic, so I'll leave my analysis link for you. However, there were two critiques that were brought up consistently by commenters beyond the usual enlightening comments telling me that I'm an idiot or just wrong without explanation that I wanted to address here. Beyond that, since we're focused on epidemiological research, I was also especially interested to understanding how something like this could happen by looking at mechanistic research as well. I discovered a few possibilities with one study, potentially breaking open the whole topic into an aha moment. Now, first, are you into the occult? Nope. I'm not talking about the supernatural. I'm talking about your blood pressure. This study looked at something called occult high blood pressure. It's essentially a blood pressure reading that is abnormal outside of your routine clinical measurements. So you go to the doctor, the nurse takes your blood pressure, and you get a normal reading. You think all is well and good, but in reality, your blood pressure is abnormally high at different points in the day, like when you're sleeping, normal daily life, and so on. Now, this study included almost 200 participants in their 50s that were healthy and beyond healthy. They were very active and had been for some time as they were highly trained endurance athletes. This is a perfect population to study because it fits nicely with the worrisome studies that I briefly summarized. When we quantified the number of people based on their type of arterial plaque, there are some confirmatory results. The low attenuation plaque there, which is also called soft plaque, is increased in people who experience occult hypertension relative to those who do not. Now, I'm not usually a huge fan of these kinds of data simply because they're categorical, but this was also confirmed in other data, including an exact match with the same data coming out of the initial studies. The amount of people with over 50% stenosis, that means the number of people that had at least 50% blockage of their blood vessels, confirmed here as well. The key distinction here is that we don't have a comparison against more lightly active individuals. So we can only make conclusions based on highly active people with or without this occult blood pressure. We will return to that because it's critically important beyond this study, as you'll soon see. The takeaway up to this point is that occult high blood pressure could be one explanation for why extremely active endurance trainees experience increased plaque development in their arteries. Now, you're likely wondering how to figure that out for yourself. Occult hypertension, high blood pressure, was defined in this study as a 24-hour average blood pressure of over 130/80 units, or a daytime average of over 135/85, or a nighttime average over 120/70 systolic and diastolic, respectively. So how could this occult blood pressure encourage plaque deposition? Well, we're discussing the pressure applied to the artery wall, which is made of cells, which could create stress and stretch the cells, causing endothelial dysfunction. These are a fine lining of cells on the blood-facing section of the artery wall that could allow more lipoprotein particle containing cholesterol to enter the subendothelial layer of the artery, a subsection of the artery behind the endothelial cells. Now, allowing more of that to be retained in the subendothelium, creating the plaque growth. Now, another tightly related possibility is the mere rise in pressure can push these lipoprotein particles from the blood into the subendothelium. In fact, studies from the 1970s showed that if you increase blood pressure in animals for certain sections of the blood vessel, the lipoprotein entry into the subendothelium was over 60% greater. What we do know is that higher blood pressure promotes greater entry of plaque-causing lipoproteins into the deeper sections of the artery. But the people included in this most recent study on endurance trainees had clinically normal blood pressure. Keep that in mind. In fact, even the studies originally showing this link between large amounts of endurance training and increased plaque in the arteries adjusted for blood pressure. I think this is an important lesson for us to understand. Just because you measure something one way doesn't mean that it's all encompassing. Basing adjustments, for example, on one clinical measure of blood pressure may not reflect other ways of measuring blood pressure that may be more telling, like a 24-hour blood pressure or an averaged blood pressure over several days, like what we're looking at here with this occult high blood pressure. If we assume that everybody had normal blood pressure by clinical measurement, it seems still possible that these people had high blood pressure through this occult blood pressure reading. So it could be that blood pressure is still one of the contributing roots, even though it was adjusted for. But this is the study that really made me have a bit of an aha moment. In this study, there were 10 runners that were doing an event called the Race Across the USA, which is a 140-day race from California to Maryland, averaging about 26 miles per day with one rest day per week. Beautifully, the researchers measured the plaque in the arteries before the race and then immediately after the race, which is as good as we can get up to now on direct relationship between the endurance exercise and plaque development. What they discovered could really break open our interpretation. Before we get into that discovery, I cover more on the mechanisms like the impact all this has on the immune system and damage that occurs to our lipoproteins called oxidation. I also cover another blood pressure related issue that can come from exercise and its relationship to plaque development. I cover all that in my extended analysis, which is included as a Physionic Insider. Plus you get everything in article format, a quick summary of the high level takeaways, a podcast, and much more. If you're interested, then check out the Physionic Insiders using the link in the description. Essentially what they found is what these other studies showed, that these people experienced increases in plaque in their arteries. You probably did not expect me to confirm everything, but there is one critical nuance that's different about this study. Check this out. Only 8 runners finished the race, so the analysis was done on 8 people. You'll see the bars that correspond to the just 4 people because only 4 people saw an increase in arterial plaque. The left bar for each person that's labeled as RU-SA is the before the race and the after is the well after. If the bars are taller, that means that there's more plaque. The orange part of the bar indicates calcified plaque, and the blue section corresponds to soft plaque. Of these 4, everyone experienced increased plaque immediately after the race. But one guy experienced the most robust increase, RUSA number 8. It's not perfect, but this is as close of direct proof the exercise caused this plaque increase. However, it also tells us a new story because I mentioned 8 people were in this study, but only 4 experienced more plaque. So what happened to the other 4? They did not have any plaque. You can see that in the graph. Again, notice the RUSA 1, 2, 3, and 8 show increased plaque. And not only that, they had elevated levels of a common inflammatory protein called a C-reactive protein. This is an inflammatory protein that you get in a routine blood test. RUSA 4, 5, 6, and 7 did not have this elevated C-reactive protein, and they did not experience plaque deposition. So you might be thinking, aha, it's that dastardly C-reactive protein that's causing these issues. And the answer is no, probably not. C-reactive protein certainly seems to associate with that relationship, but the 4 people that developed more plaque were also the only 4 people that already had plaque at baseline. So now we have 2 things that are associated with plaque development, baseline plaque and elevated C-reactive protein. Now, I'm sure there are multiple other things that are not measured, and I can definitely tell you that one thing that was measured prior, smoking status and hypertension, and both of those seem to also track. This all tells us that the bigger picture probably tells us based on limited data, and I can't stress that enough. We're talking about 8 people here. That poor overall health, in spite of being very physically active, tracks with arterial plaque deposition, while being in good health identified as non-smoking, no high blood pressure, and no elevated C-reactive protein does not track with plaque deposition. So how does this square with the previous research then? This is where I can turn it to one of the critiques offered in the comments of the last analysis. People kept asking if nutrition had been accounted for in those previous studies, and the answer is no. This might seem like a huge omission, but it isn't necessarily. I'm going to pause here and mention that I'm about to get into some important study methodology, but if you're bored by that kind of thing, just skip to this timestamp. Okay, so nutrition is critically important in causing a plaque deposition, but the researchers did account for the mediators as in the factors that actually cause the issues that nutrition influences. Excess nutrition causes weight gain, which causes plaque deposition. So we can adjust for the weight gain instead of the nutrition. That's what the researchers did. They adjusted for blood pressure, weight, cholesterol, blood sugar, and all of which would be how nutrition would work to affect our blood vessels. That means on one level, nutrition doesn't need to be accounted for directly. On another, I would argue that nutrition has impact that is beyond the obvious clinical measures like cholesterol. Nutrition offers polyphenols, nutrient presence, proteins, and more, all of which is not accounted for. So is not adjusting for nutrition directly a possible explanation? I think so, though not through the most obvious sense. Even so, we also now know that these statistical adjustments are only as good as the measurements. And as we saw with the blood pressure, there can be instances in people who endurance exercise a lot that is not picked up through routine tests. So that introduces uncertainty in the adjustments. The second critique was that all this plaque development is calcified plaque, not soft plaque. That was levied a few times, but it isn't true. Yes, other studies in those who exercise show a greater increase in calcified plaque, which is a more stable form of arterial plaque and less dangerous than the soft plaque. But as we saw earlier, and I can show you here, we are focused on the orange bars, the taller the bars. Notice how both soft, called non-calcified plaque, and calcified plaque are elevated in lifelong exercisers. Okay, the reality is there's still a lot of unanswered questions like the nutrition angle or the fact that this may only apply to people with occult hypertension or only in people who may endurance train a lot but otherwise have poor health habits. In summary, there's even more evidence that long-term heavy endurance training, the cutoff in the studies was around 10 hours per week or more, is linked to plaque in the arteries, including dangerous soft plaque. This could be, though we don't know definitively, just in people who have poor health habits around their endurance training and may exclude those with better habits. We also know that exercise in general is good for cardiovascular health, including endurance exercise done in moderation. Finally, I said this last time, we have no specific data looking at cardiovascular outcomes, which is another missing piece that we really need to figure out. So, exercise in moderation and in all instances, regardless of your exercise goals. Support your exercise with good health habits. Don't smoke. Maintain normal body weight, normal blood pressure, and so on. That's your best bet to get the best of all worlds. Until we get more illuminating evidence, I'll leave you here unless you're interested in diving into further education right here. As always, deeply appreciate you stopping by. I'll catch you in the next one. See you.